Hi, I'm Scott Houston, and welcome to another broadcast of Learning with Power. This is episode number 36, and this episode is going to deal with the future, and mainly the next 50 years. And so that's the title of this broadcast is going to be called The Next 50 Years. Even though I'm going to talk about some things where I'm going to touch upon, like what our imprint is going to be, or how we're going to be viewed by people, say, 500 years in the future. But I'm talking about, but mostly these things are not only what I think is going to happen in the next 50 years, but more what I think we should do, or should try to do in the next 50 years in order to make things better. That this is what they should focus on or should work on. But then there's also reality of what I think is probably going to happen in the next 50 years. Okay. So the first thing I want to touch on is because I mentioned this a couple of broadcasts ago. So I said this is episode, 36? So I think in maybe 34 or something I talked about AI. And so the CEO of a company called OpenAI, his name is Sam Altman, made a statement in the media recently. He was actually addressing a group of college grads. And he said the most asinine, stupid thing for a CEO of a tech company to say. And he says, I kind of am envious of the opportunities that you guys are going to have in the future, because you're going to be able to have all these exciting space jobs. I don't know where he comes up with that. That was about the dumbest thing and the most short-sighted thing to ever say. Space jobs. I mean, come on. I mean, in the 1980s, everybody talked about, we're going to have flying cars by the year 2000. Well, now it's 26, and that's not happening anytime soon. We can't even get electric cars. We can't even get on top of that idea, let alone flying cars. I mean, it's just ridiculous. To think that we're going to live off-world like Blade Runner. We're going to have off-world jobs like Blade Runner. The reality of space is that there's nothing that we really need in space, or that we really need to get from space, that we don't actually already have here on Earth. But what may happen eventually is it may eventually become cost-effective to have like a mining mission to one of the other satellites, either the Moon or Mars or whatever. You can't really have a mining mission to Uranus. It's just too far away. And the idea of having interstellar travel is just impossible. That's not going to happen, not with humans. I think what may happen eventually is you're going to have like a drone, like an unmanned, like what we did with the Voyager. And look how long it takes for the Voyager to get outside of the solar system. That was sent 50 years ago. It's just recently leaving the solar system. We haven't even talked about the 25 light years it still has to travel to get to the next solar system. Forget that. It's just left this solar system. So, but that's what we could do. We could send an unmanned vehicle toward a planet. I think the nearest really good possibility is like 125 light years away. It'll take, thousands of years to get there. But we could send a vehicle directly to that planet, which may have life on it, and if it lands, that'll be a UFO for those people, and they'll be like, what? But it's not going to have little green Martians or even green Earthlings that are dressed in green, or that have turned green because they've died hundreds of years earlier. But that's the most that we could do as far as interstellar travel. We cannot do interstellar travel with humans. It's not going to happen. I don't think that there's wormholes, and even if there is a wormhole, there's no guarantee that our molecular structure is going to be not compromised if we were to go through something like that. And I think actually it probably would be. So we're not going to have jobs in space. It's just a stupid thing. But what might happen eventually is that it may become cost-effective enough, and this is going to be a long time from now, probably even more than 50 years, that we may say, you know what, there's a lot of iridium on the Moon or on Mars or someplace like that. And those really are the only two possibilities. Venus is, Venus and Mercury, forget about it. They're too hot. Jupiter is just a gas giant. You can't really land on Jupiter. I guess you could go to the moons of Jupiter, like Io or Encephalitis. That's what I like to call it. One of those moons. The one is like covered with like methane ice, and that may have life on it, and it deserves to send a probe there to drill into the ice and find out if there's life there. But it's going to be like microbial life, or maybe like small little, maybe even fishes. But that would be it. But it's not something you'd want to land on, and it's not something that you would want to mine for minerals. That would just be for scientific purposes. But there are maybe some of the moons that may have resources there that we might realize, hey, there's a lot of this really expensive resource that we really need to have, rare earths maybe, and we need to go mine it. That I can see happening, but it's very expensive, and it would have to be, those minerals would have to become unbelievably valuable in order to justify that sort of a trip. Because, I mean, we haven't even been able to go back to the moon yet. We did that in 1969, and here it is 55 years later, we still haven't gotten back to the moon. They're saying, well, maybe around 2030 we might get there, maybe a little later. It's this hard for us to get back to the moon again. Space jobs? I mean, this guy is delusional. But that brings me on to the next topic of, so the bottom line is, AI is going to wipe out a lot of jobs. And it's the best thing for corporations. Woohoo! Corporations, yay! Bad for people. And what's going to happen, and corporations are just going to have to bite the bullet eventually, and I guess it's going to have to be done during a liberal administration, is we're going to have universal basic income, because there just are not going to be enough jobs for all the masses of people to be able to find. Even though there's a lot of jobs that need filling, that people don't really want to do, that pay well, and people are actually getting to be less inclined to want to work a job. And they don't even want to go to the office. They want to stay at home. I don't really understand that mentality, but I'd rather go to the office, get at a house at least, But anyway, but AI is going to wipe out a lot of jobs, period, the end. And maybe it behooves Sam Altman to say that it won't, but it will. So that's part of the future. Okay, so one thing that we're not going to find in space, and we're never going to be able to find in space, is oil and gas. And we are still totally dependent on oil and gas, and really way too dependent on oil and gas. And in the last 10 years, since Trump's candidacy in 2016, there has been this worldwide wave, this global wave of conservatism that has, and xenophobia that has, covered the entire earth and influenced everybody on the entire earth. We've all gone backwards. I was very optimistic about the future in 2014, but then we've had a huge pushback by society against all of the liberal sort of socialist sort of advances that we were making in the early 2010s. And a lot of people say, of course, that that's stupid, that we were moving in that direction, that those, thank goodness we're not doing what those libtards wanted, that kind of thing. Eventually the libtards are going to be vindicated when we, oh crap, there's no more oil? Oh, well, we didn't see that coming. Yeah, we did. So 500 years from now, so this is an article that I wrote for City Night magazine some time ago when I used to be the editor for that magazine. And the article was called The Oil Age. And I think I already touched upon it, because this has to do with resource management, and I'm going to get to that later on when I talk about population control and things like that. But basically, so I talked about the Nile River Project, and I think I did a whole broadcast on the Nile River Project. But these other things, I'm going to talk about 12 things in this episode that are not enough to make a whole broadcast over, and it all deals with kind of the same sort of theme, which is the future, what we should do for the future, and what's going to happen in the future. So the first thing was no space jobs, so don't count on that. Secondly, the oil age. So 500 years from now, people are going to look back, historians, archaeologists, whatever, that'll be around at that time, are going to look back on this era that we're living in currently. And this era, I would say, started in around 1850, and it'll end around maybe 2150. That's my projection. And this is going to be called the oil age. And they're going to be very jealous of us. They're going to say, oh man, oil and natural gas is an amazing commodity. It's an amazing resource. Geez, the things that those guys could have done in those days, if they only would have known, if they only could have conserved it longer. And, this is really the only limited resource in the universe. Because you're not going to find that on Mars or on the moon. You might be able to find it on Venus, to be honest with you, but good luck surviving the 900-degree temperatures there. But you're not going to find it on Earth, and you're not going to find it anywhere in the universe. It's gone, when a resource is gone, it'll be gone. It's over. And it's one of the only resources that exists that's truly limited. And again, with this wave of conservatism, we've gone backwards. And so we're going against electric cars now. And electric cars are becoming passé, and nobody likes Tesla, and BID is taking over, but not in this country. And so all of the tax rebates that we were getting and incentives that we were getting to buy electric cars, and the massive constructing that they were doing of all of the electrical refill areas or pumps or whatever, like Buc-ee's or whatever, or at Walmart or something like that. They were starting to build a lot of that. Well, that's all stopped now, and that's a shame, because eventually we're going to have to move back in that direction, because there's no reason in the world to have to power something like automobiles with gas and oil. That's just stupid. And what's going to happen eventually is when we run out of oil around 2150, and of course as we approach it, it's going to be greatly affected, is without natural gas and oil, we will no longer have intercontinental flights. Commercial flights, gone, bye-bye, because in order to power a jet engine, you need a tremendous amount of combustion. And right now, we only know how to do that with natural gas or oil and natural gas. We can only do that way. And that creates a tremendous amount of torque with that intense combustion. And the key to flight is you have to have, the right wing design, but then you have to have acceleration, and you have to have enough acceleration fast enough to be able to take flight. So you can't just gradually work up to 300 miles an hour or something. You have to burst into 300 miles an hour, and then you'll take flight if you have the right wing design. And so those are the fundamentals of flight, and you have to have this sort of massive torque and propulsion in order to get, especially big commercial jets, up in the air. And you can't, as far as I know, nobody's come up with another way to do it. And you can't have a nuclear power plant on a commercial jet. That's too dangerous, Oops, we had a turbulence. Boom! So I don't know how they're going to do it, but I don't really see a way to do it, because we don't have fusion yet. We don't have cold fusion yet. There's a lot of advancements. There's a lot of ways that it could be done, but we're not doing it yet. We're not there, and I don't really see how we're going to be able to do it. And so unless we come up with some amazing technology that I can't even foresee or don't even see yet for powering commercial jets, when we run out of gas in the year 2150, it's going to be bye-bye. Remember when we used to be able to fly around in these things called commercial jets, and we could just fly from America over to Europe? Remember when we used to be able to do that back in the old days? That's what it's going to be. So that's your future. No more intercontinental flights. Goodbye. And as we get close to the point of where we're going to run out of oil, those flights are going to become really expensive, because they burn a tremendous amount of fuel. And so to take by 2120, let's say, the only people that are going to be able to make these commercial flights are people like Elon Musk or the president or Putin or some equivalent type person. Regular average Joe, why waste the gas that we have on a flight for those guys? They can get by some other way. So it's going to happen probably within the next 50 years. Someone is going to have to see this coming. Someone's going to have to understand that even if we do find a lot of gas or something under Greenland or something like that, that it's going to run out eventually. At some point it's going to run out. Even if you find lots more reserves around, it's going to run out eventually. Now, there's a chance that we can have it back again, because basically what it is it's organic material that's been compressed over millions of years. And this organic material is not dinosaurs and things like that. What it is was before the dinosaurs, I guess in the coniferous age, and we had all of these massive forests, and we had super high oxygenation rates and huge bugs that were flying around and things. The world was a lot warmer in those days, and so like 90% of the earth was very warm, and it had these very tropical forests and very thick forests that covered the entire world, or most of it. I mean, there was deserty areas, but and there was water, but a lot of it. And so that's now, and that was hundreds of millions of years ago, and that's what's become oil. And eventually, like 400 million years from now, we do still have organic material and forests and things like that will eventually be covered by Earth, and we will eventually probably be able to find some natural gas or oil in the future. But the thing is that we're using it at a much faster rate than how it can be created. So we're going to use it up in 300 years, but it takes 100 million years to create it. So eventually, probably people will be gone by then. We will have some again, but not within the next, let's say, 1,000 years. That's not going to happen. And so we're going to run out of it. And so bye-bye commercial transportation, commercial airlines. Goodbye. Thing of the past. So what we're going to have is another thing that conservatism doesn't like, and that is high-speed trains. And even more than high-speed trains, but even like what Elon Musk proposed a while back that he was trying to develop, called a hyperloop, might even be better than high-speed trains. And again, I think that would be a very expensive way to go, a hyperloop, and you might have to be kind of wealthy to pay for that. But it's a way. And I think both can coexist together. You can have a hyperloop and next to it just a high-speed train. So the hyperloop, it's going to go a lot faster, but it's only going to carry like a little car of like 3 people or something. But the train is going to be able to carry like the masses, and it's going to go slower, only 300 miles an hour. But high-speed train is what we're going to have to do. And so we're going to have to build massive bridges, like connecting through the Aleutian Islands over to Russia. That's really the only way to do it, because I mean, you can do it like through Newfoundland and up through Greenland and Iceland and maybe over to Ireland. But that's going to be hard to do. And you've got really deep waters in the Atlantic Ocean there, and you've got really deep waters in the Pacific up there that you have to cross over. But there was a land bridge that the people came over from Asia 12,000 years ago, before the last ice age. So it's possible to build a bridge over there. I don't think you can do it across the Atlantic, but you could definitely do it across the Pacific, and that might be the only way to do it, because otherwise there would be no physical way anymore other than boat to travel from one continent to another continent. That would then be the best way to do it. And if you're going to build high-speed trains to connect continents, like Asia to North America, you might as well just use high-speed trains all over the place, which can be used with electricity and fueled with electricity, and build all kinds of high-speed rail systems all over the United States and all over North America. And that really must be done. And I think eventually, inevitably, it will be done, because people are going to, even conservatives are going to realize, you know what, we're going to have to do this, because it's affecting us now. It's costing us too much to fly anymore because gas is getting too rare. We're going to have to come up with another way. How else can we do it? And when that happens, then they'll come up with the idea of high-speed trains for everybody. So, but it's going to be a while yet, but that's what has to happen. Okay, so that's number 2, the oil age. Number 3, I want to talk about the cell phone culture and the way that it's become, and I've talked about cell phones a lot in a lot of my episodes, but cell phones are the only invention that has ever been developed by humans that became a mandatory purchase. You must have a smartphone, or you cannot survive in modern society. You must have a smartphone. So, I mean, you know, in the past, if you still wanted to go by horse and buggy, you could have done that indefinitely. That's what the Amish people did, you know, rather than going with a car. I mean, it was your option, you know. I mean, cars were better and more efficient, but if you still wanted to do horse and buggy because you felt more comfortable with that, or you were against technology or something, you could do that. But this is not an option. Even Amish people are required to use, and I'll bet you all the Amish people, I bet you the most devout Amish people in Lancaster, Pennsylvania have smartphones now. And it's because this is a must-own, and it's a governmental must-own. And the reason why the government forces you to have a smartphone in America is because it's the best thing for corporations. But in other countries, like China, where the government has control of the corporations, they have even more mandated that you must have a smartphone. In America, we at least have some democracy, so we have some pushback against things like that, and so actually we're behind the rest of the world as far as modern technology. But like in China, they're ahead of us, and already in China, everything is with the smartphone. In fact, money has almost been made obsolete in China now. And so when I was last in Beijing at the airport, I remember, which was just last year, everything was done with WeChat Pay. That's their big app, WeChat, which is kind of like Facebook and social media, but it also is like Apple Pay. So they have this WeChat Pay. You're moving the camera there, Ed.
Yeah.
So we have this. So it's like WeChat Pay is like their version of Apple Pay, but they won't take Apple Pay. I mean, Apple Pay works all over the world, but not too much in China. Because it's Apple and it's American, and they like to do their own things. And so if I didn't have WeChat Pay downloaded on my phone and all of my accounts transferred over to WeChat Pay, which I wasn't going to do just for a 5-hour layover, but if I lived there, I would have to do it. I would be literally forced to have to do this. I would have to be connected to all my accounts. I would have to get WeChat Pay in order to buy anything, including food, you know. And so, because there was one money changer in the entire huge airport, and the actual rate of exchange wasn't too bad, but you had to buy at least like $10 worth, or no, you had to pay a $10 fee to get money. So unless you bought like $100 worth, and I wasn't going to spend $100 inside of 4 hours at the airport. I don't eat that much food, you know. Or buy a souvenir of some big panda or something. I don't know. But anyway, so it was required. And eventually, though, this is going to become the world, including America. America's always behind. So like in the 90s, America was behind the rest of the world with cell phones. So you travel to Europe or Australia or someplace in the late 90s, everybody had cell phones. That was one of the things I remembered when I was living in Australia from 97 to 98, is how everybody had a cell phone. And I was like, wow, really? Because at that time, 97, 98 in America, we had pagers and things like that. Most people didn't have cell phones, but everybody had one in Australia. And I was like, well, I guess that's coming. I guess that's the world. And indeed, that is what happened, is everybody has a cell phone now. But, you know, America is actually like the last bastion of you know, let's embrace the old technology, which is a good thing, actually. It's one of the few good things about America. And so let's talk about cell phones and how that's going to dominate the world in the future. First of all, every sci-fi movie, popular sci-fi movie that you've ever seen, totally missed it. Because people are just glued to their iPhones. You know, I saw a meme, a cartoon meme on the internet recently, where one of the people at the pearly gates made a comment about how everybody who's going to heaven now is just staring aimlessly, you know, in anguish at their empty hands, because they don't have any iPhones in heaven, because it's something that the Bible missed. The Bible talks about the future, but it missed the impact that iPhones and the smartphone is going to have in the future. That's a pretty significant thing to miss. Nostradamus missed it. And movies like 2001: A Space Odyssey and Back to the Future Part 3 and Blade Runner and all these various different future movies, they all missed it. Even pretty recent ones like Guardians of the Galaxy, which is kind of a cool movie series and that came out in the late teens, they missed it. They're not obsessed with their cell phones. Even in the late teens, we were thinking, well, it's just kind of a fad. It's kind of something people do now. In the future, they're not going to really care about it. I don't know how you're going to go backwards. If you eliminate money and you force literally everybody to do everything with their phone, how are we going to go backwards from that? How is that going to become passé? I don't think it will. I think that's here to stay. I don't think there's any way to go back from that. And it's a mandatory thing. So, okay, so that's number 3. Mandatory cell phones. And no other invention has ever been like that. For anything else, you had an option. As a consumer, you had an option. I don't want to buy that. I don't like it. But not with iPhones or not with smartphones. You have no option. You must buy it. You're forced to. You have to have one. It's like having a home. You have to have one. Or having clothing. You have to have it. You're not allowed to walk around naked anymore. It's along those lines. Okay, number 5. And so along with these iPhones, when you think about the 2020s, what really embodies the 2020s? What's really happened in the 2020s that wasn't really a thing in the 2010s? What's a thing in the 2020s? And of all the things that I was thinking about, the most significant change in the 2020s is the whole tap and pay system. When you take your card and you just tap it, or you take your phone and you just tap it. The whole tap and pay thing with either the phone or a card, if you have Apple Pay on a card or something. But tap and pay is, that's a big innovation, and it's changed a little bit the way that people handle money. And when you start messing with people's money, that's when it fundamentally is changing your life. When you can't even buy things without doing that. All right, so that's number 5. Tap and pay is the most significant innovation or change or advancement or whatever you might want to call it that's happened in the 2020s, in my opinion, so far. Maybe you have a different opinion, and I'm actually interested in your opinion about that. Usually I don't want to hear it. I don't care what your opinion is. But this I would be interested in hearing about if you want to contact me about that. Okay, and so that leads me to number 6. The phenomenon of cord cutting. That everybody is going away from cable and they're all doing streaming. And so cord cutting is having a dramatic impact on like professional sports, especially baseball. And so people are, and so the management companies for these broadcast companies, of like all these sports networks or whatever. Can't think of. I'm having another brain fart. Kind of like when I couldn't think about Guyana and when I was talking about Venezuela. That's something I also wanted to touch on. Guyana, yeah, that's the country that's next to Venezuela that I couldn't remember the name because I had a senior moment. They've got a lot of oil also in Guyana. Guyana is where they had a very famous French prison. And it's the butterfly. That's something about the butterfly movie. The guy had a big tattoo on his chest of a butterfly that took place at this French prison in Guyana. Jonestown, where the Jonestown massacre, that was in Guyana. But they also have a lot of oil in Guyana, especially offshore, which America also wants to control by controlling Venezuela. That's another thing that I forgot to touch on, is Guyana. So anyway, sorry about that. But along those lines also, I forgot about, cable and so we're talking about cable and streaming and things like that. But the big reason why we're having cord cutting is really because of mismanagement and arrogance of corporation, typical arrogance of corporate America, and the arrogance of these companies that just kept jacking up the prices, and the customer service, bye-bye. You couldn't complain about anything. And they were ripping people off. They were cheating people. They were saying, you're getting 600 megabytes when you're only getting like 60. That's fraud. But hey, you're a corporation, so what am I going to do? Sue you? Sue you on the contract for fraud? No. In fact, if I want to cancel, I canceled my cable because they were such jerks, and not because I don't need cable anymore, even though I live without it. Not because there's no market anymore for cable, but because they were just such jerks that I just couldn't deal with them anymore. I just was like, I cannot accept this abuse anymore. Goodbye. And it's total mismanagement. But for the $10 that they say that I still owed them, they have hunted me down like I murdered their family. I mean, it's relentless, chasing up this $10 that they think I owe them. $10. But the difference is, if somebody owes me $10, I can't do anything about it. But if you owe a corporation $10, well, they got a lot more power. And they do, and they know it. And that's a big problem, especially in this country. Major problem that we're going to have to do something about. Okay, so number 6 was cord cutting. Number 7. So that's all about technology and stuff. So let's talk about like the environment and like resource management and things like that. And that really is the key to the future and to surviving in the future. And I think ultimately we'll figure that out, honestly. But we're going to have to do better resource management. And this ties into where I had done a whole broadcast before on the Nile River Project. And that was about water management. And water management is probably the single most important resource in the world for us to be able to manage. And so China before had this policy of only one child per family, and they were trying to limit their population growth because there was this attitude for a long time that the population is growing uncontrollably, and we're going to have too much population, and that's going to ruin the world because we're going to have too many people in the world, and many movies in the future, like Soylent Green, for example, which also missed cell phones totally. Kind of touched on this, but there's been a lot of futuristic movies where they talk about overpopulation, and a lot of people have been really worried about overpopulation. Well, I've got news for you. We've got about 7 billion people in the world now. We've got room probably for about 50 billion at least, if we do proper resource management. And this all has it, and this includes whether or not we ever find it feasibly reasonable to go to, say, the moon or to Mars to look for minerals to mine for minerals on the moon or on Mars. It's just all a matter of what our available resources are and using them most strategically. And that also has to do with the environment. And you do have to worry about the environment because it directly is connected to resource management, which we really have to do in order to sustain, for human population to be sustainable. But because of the iPhone or smartphone or whatever that we touched on earlier, and technology and the way that's affected people's lives, actually the population is going down naturally. And now China no longer has that rule. I mean, actually they rescinded it like 10 years ago. And now you can have as many kids as you want. And in fact, in Japan, they have such a problem with a lack of people being born and a lack of population growth that they actually are giving huge government subsidized bonuses to people who decide to get married and have children. So if you get married and you have your first kid, you get this huge check for like $4,000 from the government of Japan because they're so desperate for population there. So we're actually having a crisis of not enough population. And the reason why that's a crisis is because the baby boom happened worldwide. And so we've got a massive amount of 80-year-olds in the world relative to the rest of the population. Now in countries like in Africa, like in Chad, the population is literally like 40% 15 years old and under. But I'm not talking about places like that. I'm talking about most of the world that can no longer support the 80-year-olds that are walking around, and there's a lot of them in Japan, that's for sure. Because they have a very good diet and they tend to live for very longer than we do. They tend to live for a very long time. So they're having problems with not enough population. So again, resource management. And it's also where the smartphone has taken away people's attention so much, and culture has moved in such a way that women now are so empowered that they're saying like, you know what? I don't want any kids. I don't feel like having any kids. I want to be a career woman, and I want to just shop on my iPhone all day long. And so we're having less kids as a result. And that's a major shift that's happening, and that's going to continue to happen. And so this whole worry or concern that people have had about population growth, we're still growing, but it's not a big problem. But where we're growing, where the population is growing, is in countries that can't afford it. Like countries where, like in Africa, where they already have massive starvation, and it's just being magnified by the fact that that the population is growing. And so actually, because they don't have the infrastructure, and they're not really iPhone centered in those places, they're having too many kids. But that's an isolated part of the world where there is overpopulation and there's a population problem. But for the most of the world, and most of the developed world, and the world is rapidly developing much more than it ever did, and most of Africa is becoming very developed now. I'm just talking about some extreme examples in some places, in like interior part of Africa. Mostly though, it's advancing fine, and the world is advancing fine. So that's an environmental thing, a population control. But I also talked about, and so one thing that we can do along with population control, and I talked about how the problem with population now is that it's too old, especially in Western cultures, because of the baby boom, which actually was a worldwide phenomenon. But also, so one of the things that we should probably address in the future is this whole concept of getting married and having kids and staying married for life. This was instituted in the Middle Ages and really was a church-driven thing, and it really was sort of a necessary thing to encourage men not to leave their families, because men can just impregnate women and run off, right? And so society, they tried to make society in such a way that men couldn't really do that. But now women have all kinds of power and equal rights and everything, and now men are not significant anymore. And just the whole idea of getting married for life, and getting married and having kids and all that stuff, I think it's an antiquated idea that's left over really literally from the Middle Ages. And I think in the future, we're going to move away from that. And as we move away from that, it's going to necessitate a dramatic alteration in the law, in the premise of law of America and around the rest of the world. And we should introduce a thing which I've had this idea for a long time now, called term marriages. Now, when I've mentioned that middle-aged women want to hit me with a broom whenever I mention this idea, they're like, what? You just don't want to get married, Term marriages. And so, do you, John, take Julia to be your lawfully wedded wife for the next 5 years, and to honor and love and whatever and respect for the next 5 years? I do. Because, you can make a commitment like that for 5 years, or 10 years, or maybe even. But I think 5-year term marriages. And then if you want to renew, you can renew. It can easily be done. But I think term marriage, and so if you eliminate the whole divorce, if you have it already set up within the society and within culture, how to deal with kids and joint property when people separate, because it's an inevitable that will happen. If that's already written into the law and it's already, a foregone conclusion, we already know what's going to happen and what we'll do if we decide to break up at that point. If we do have kids, all these things should be addressed and written into the law, so there's not all this haggling and cantankerous, and hurtful feelings and everything else. I mean, it's ridiculous. So if you know that you're only going to marry her for 5 years, I think it changes the whole dynamic of how important one woman or one man is in your life. They can be important, but it can just be someone that you're deciding to spend time with for now, and it works for now. And maybe, I admire people that stay together for 40 years, and they remain happy or something. That's amazing. And I'm not saying that we can't do that in the future, and that won't happen in the future or shouldn't happen in the future, but you can easily extend the term, But if you have term marriages, if you do it like in 5 or maybe even 10-year increments, it's much more controllable. And so as the 5-year or 10-year expiration date comes up, you can have discussions and you can say, well, how do you feel? You know, I mean, I still love you and I still want to be with you and it would really hurt me if we separate. And if they're like, yeah, me too, you know, you say, well, why don't we renew? Okay, yeah, let's renew. But otherwise, you might, so it would force you to have these discussions and you might say, you know what, I don't know. We can still stay together or we can still hang out or do whatever we want. We just kind of be friends, but maybe we don't necessarily need to be married anymore. And if it becomes like really easily done, so like in California, they have this no-fault marriage, which I think is far superior to the other types of marriages that we have, especially in the central part of the United States. So anyway, okay, so, and it's another way that you can manage population growth or population control is through limited marriages and not by not forcing couples to necessarily have to have children if they don't feel like it's something that they want to do. Or maybe for this marriage, because they're only 21, they're not ready. But in the next marriage, when they're 27 or something, then maybe at that point they do want to have kids. You know, it can change. You know. Anyway, and I think it needs to be more fluid and flexible within the law. All right. So that brings us to we were talking about baby boomers, and so baby boomers have profoundly influenced the culture, marketing. And as far as not evolution, but advancement, you know, like a technological advancement, things like that, has largely been driven by baby boomers. And after all, baby boomers brought us the smartphone. Hey, what a contribution! They, you know, so 1969 are like, you know, having these sit-ins, you know, no war, and now in the 1990s and 2000s, they're like, hey, let's have this device that like controls everybody's life and makes corporations rich. Thank you. Anyway, so I'm from a generation that's actually after the baby boomers. And I would like to call that generation Generation W. And nobody else has ever really dealt with that. You know, I was born in '64, so they want to say that I'm a baby boomer. But I'm not a baby boomer. Donald Trump is a baby boomer. Hillary Clinton's a baby boomer. The world that they grew up in was entirely different from the world that I grew up in. They grew up in, you know, bubble gum. They grew up with hula hoops. They grew up with playing outside and having optimism about the future, but worried about Russia. I mean, we grew up in a completely different era, you know. We're not baby boomers. And our approach to technology is different, and our approach to life and culture, everything is dramatically different from people born in, let's say, 1964 than people born in 1946. And I don't really want to get into it too much. I was thinking about writing a book about it at some point, but I don't know if there's enough there to really write a book about it. Certainly I could write a paper on it, like a doctoral thesis type of paper like I like to write, which unfortunately I don't have the credentials to be able to publish. I have lots of ideas and I have lots of material. I can write doctoral theses until the sun comes down, goes down, cows come down home or whatever. I could do that indefinitely, but I can't publish them. So, you know, because you got to have that piece of paper. So I have here, I just don't have the certificate that says that I'm smart. So like the Wizard of Oz, you know, where the great and powerful Oz gives to the scarecrow, you need a degree that says that you're smart. Well, I have a college degree. It's from overseas. It's not very well respected in America. In fact, it's not respected here at all. So I don't really have the credentials, unfortunately. That's why I'm doing these broadcasts, because if I could, I would publish these papers and become probably famous and rich by publishing these papers. As it is, I have to do it this way. Nobody wants to see it. Nobody cares what I think, and I'm not rich from my ideas. But also, I have all these ideas about inventions, like the idea of the Entrepreneurs Association, which I talked about in an earlier episode, which I can't really do much about. And so I'm just giving it to you in these broadcasts. If you want to do something with that idea, go for it. Should be done, needs to be done, but anyway. And so getting back to the whole Gen W thing. So people born, let's say, between, I want to call it like 1962 to like 1967, because we're not Gen X either, because that's another dramatically different cultural environment that they grew up in than what we grew up in. So I want to say, like, for 5 years, between 62 and 67, that should be called Generation W. And if you don't address that as a separate generation, you really are missing a lot, because a lot of things changed during our lifetime. So the difference between being born in 1961 and being born in 1968 is dramatic. But it was also a lot different from being born in 1946 and being born in 1964. That was dramatic also. And it's a dramatic difference between someone who was born in 1962 and someone who was born in 1968. That also was a dramatic difference. So there should be a thing called Generation W. Okay, so that's another thing that I want to talk about. And so that was talking about baby boomers, and that related to like population control and resource management. So another thing I want to talk about with resource management is, and this is number 10. So Generation W is number 9, term marriage, number 8, number 7, resource management in regards to population control. This is all part B of this whole broadcast. This is the last part of part B. This is number 10, and I'm going to talk about microplastics. And this has to do with the environment. So microplastics are becoming a really major problem. And in fact, they're finding that there's microplastics inside of people's brains. And I don't think it's a very positive thing that, you know, to have in your brain, because I can't imagine your brain like sending a signal through a little piece of plastic. I don't think that'll work. So, because it like impedes electrical impulses and stuff. So, I mean, microplastics are a big problem. And it's out in the ocean. We're having huge sections of the ocean that are like, you know, completely polluted with microplastics, and it's killing off a lot of the marine life. But more than that, more than marine life and things like that, I mean, it's just, you know, you see where you go, you see, like if you travel and stuff, and you go to like second world type countries, along these rail lines and things like that, along that they're not in dumps and things, you just see empty plastic bags, hundreds, thousands of them, all along the pathway, just left and discarded. I mean, they're everywhere. And so what do you do about all these plastic bags? So California has this like, basically this rule now that they don't give out plastic bags anymore. You got to bring your own, or you got to pay for it, or you just get like maybe a paper bag or a biodegradable bag or something like that. I think that's asinine, but at least it's an idea. It was a step forward. I mean, it was a step toward trying to do something about it. I mean, but unfortunately, that little bit of that little measure is not going to make a dent. But it does make people's lives extremely inconvenient to deal with that. So there has to be another way around it. There has to be another workaround than that, than just saying, okay, no more plastic bags. Plastic bags are here. We have to find a way to deal with them better than, you know, more efficient than just saying no more plastic bags. Because that's also dumb. Because plastic bags are, again, like with cable, is something that, you know, is still useful, that we need. You know, it's practical. I mean, plastic bags are more practical than paper bags, because paper bags break very easily, first of all. Especially if you're going to dump your trash out in a dumpster. You don't want to take a thing of like a whole trash bag in a paper bag. It'll bust out for sure, you know. So obviously plastic bags are a necessary item. But microplastics are a serious problem that we are going to have to reckon with in the future, within the next future years. Okay, and then also, you know, when you talk about the environment, you have to also mention like global warming, things like that. And my personal feelings about global warming is, yeah, it's real, it's really happening, and it's due to men's human activity. But I don't think it's as big of a problem as a lot of these, you know, global warming alarmists are. Oh, the world's going to end because it's warming temperatures. I mean, you know, we are omnivores. That means humans can eat anything. So, you know, global warming, it may kill off some species, but we'll eat whatever there is. You know, it's not going to kill life, because it used to be that the whole world was pretty warm. I mean, even in the Arctic areas, it was warm. I mean, like tropical type warm. And life didn't perish. We just had different kinds of life. So whatever life exists with whatever temperatures there are and with whatever the weather patterns happen to be, it's not going to kill life. And humans can eat anything. So it's not going to kill human beings no matter what happens with global warming. So don't panic about it. But yeah, it's an issue. And it is happening, and it's because of human activity. So let's not deny that anymore, and let's try to do something about it. But you don't have to be alarmed and go, oh my God, the world's going to end. We're going to die in the next 5 years. No, that's ridiculous. Okay, so that's the last thing I want to say on the environment and microplastics, which is number 10, which brings us to number 11. And number 11 is like, fundamentally, from a broader scale and like a worldwide scale, what should we do about it? What should we do about all of these issues that I'm discussing in the future, and what do I think might happen in the future? And that is, so the first thing, I'll deal with the world. So the world really needs to have actually expanded UN powers. So America kind of runs NATO, but they're kind of out of the UN. Actually, the UN needs to have more, but the UN is based in New York City, as the UN headquarters. And the UN needs to have more world authority. Right now, most of what's called international law is being conducted in a place called Den Haag, which is in the Netherlands. And there's very limited amount of power that these global agencies and international law, it has no bite at all. That's in violation of international law. Who cares? That's what Donald Trump says, right? So, so that's an issue. I mean, we need to have expanded, the UN needs to have expanded powers. We need to be able to say to countries, you can't do that. You can't treat other countries like that. You can't pollute the world like that. You can't treat people like that as far as human rights. We need to have more power, and we need to have some agency, and might as well make it the UN, that has authority, where their legal terms, like that's against violation of international law. Well, how do you process that? How do you adjudicate a violation of international law? You can't. But there needs to be some powerful agency that is backed with sufficient resources that can actually enforce international law. And that is something that, as we become more assimilated and matriculated with each other, and the world continues to move forward as far as technology, and as all the cultures tend to blend and assimilate with each other more and transpire with each other more. And this is obviously going to happen after the huge wave of conservatism that's been hitting the world in the last 10 years, and the xenophobia that's been striking the world in the last, that is obviously going to have to die down, and we're going to have to move away from that, because ultimately you can't shut yourself off from the rest of the world, because the rest of the world is going to happen. And that's what the emperors did in Ming China, is they cut themselves off from the rest of the world, and the rest of the world just passed them by. And that was why, what happened to China? They were so powerful. They were making all these advancements in the 1200s. What happened to them? Well, the Ming Dynasty, when they shut themselves off from the rest of the world. That's what happened to them. And then so the rest of the world just passed them by. Bye-bye. Stay into yourself. Stay in your own shell like a turtle. Bye-bye. That's what happened to China. Well, that's what will happen to America, or any country that becomes an isolationist country. So that obviously is going to have to die down, and we're going to have to become more global. And we're going to have more powers, that the UN powers or international law needs to have some jurisdiction to be able to be enforced effectively internationally, in order to keep rogue nations and rogue dictators, where they may be, from misbehaving. And I don't mean like controlling Maduro, because he's a villain in the eyes of Trump and in all the corporations and all the banksters in Europe. But he's not necessarily a villain. So we have to have a meeting about this. And so you have Trump and you have your other banksters saying, it is bad, but then you need to also have representation for him that says, well, wait a minute, no, actually, this is what he's trying to do, and he's not that bad. And what you might need to do instead is say, okay, well, you violated this and this and this sanction, or these international laws, but this is going to be your penalty, and this is what we're going to do about it. Rather than abducting him and yanking him away from his country and confining him in a jail in New York City or something. That's a little bit unrealistic. So the UN needs to have expanded power. So that's number 11. And then that's finally going to bring me to the last point, which is a point that I've already raised before in a previous episode. And that is, we're going to talk about constitutional reform. And yeah, what we really need is to have election reform. But in order to have election reform, fundamentally, you're going to have constitutional reform. Because there's problems with the U.S. Constitution, and there was problems with the way that it was written to begin with. And those people were not saints, and they were not Nostradamus, and they weren't connected to Jesus or anything, and were all knowing about the future. They were humans. And one of the things about the people that wrote the Constitution, or even established the United States, people such as Jefferson, people such as Washington, these people were all wealthy landowners. They were all rich. You go look at Monticello in Virginia. You go look at George Washington's home where he lived with Martha, because Martha actually had the money. They were rich. They were very rich. And so they set up the government to benefit rich people, because they felt that we should have authority and power because we know better than those poorer farmers, and so that's why we have lobbyists and things today, and that's why big business manipulates everything in America. And ultimately, since America is the most powerful economic force in the world, it filters down and affects and dominates and influences the entire world. And so really the most important thing in the world is constitutional reform. And you've got people like Bernie Sanders, bless his heart, who is a democratic socialist, which I know Republicans think he's terrible, but actually, yeah, that's where we need to go. That's being very progressive. And he's having this tour around America now, called the Fight Oligarchy Tour. It's what it's called, Bernie Sanders Fight Oligarchy Tour. It's great, but you're not going to be able to do crap about oligarchs unless you have constitutional reform. It's just futile. I mean, you can complain and stomp your feet and get angry and say, they shouldn't be able to do that. You're right. But what are you going to do about it? You have to have constitutional reform. And that's the only way that you're going to be able to fix all these problems. And within the constitutional reform, then, you have to have provisions for elections that exclude private interests and exclude donations from private entities. You can't allow that, because when you have all politicians are being funded by private enterprise, what's going to happen? The interests and the self-interest of those private entities or the private enterprises is going to be served. Only their interests and not the interests of the people. It's a fundamental problem that was created by the forefathers of the United States. I mean, it was a huge problem that they did not allow changes in that sort of a system. I mean, now that we have the Industrial Revolution and we have everything being linked together now with the smartphone, and everything now is being tied in with a smartphone and regulated in that way, this was something that Jefferson and Washington could not possibly foresee. They didn't foresee it in the Bible. They didn't foresee it as late as the late teens when they had Guardians of the Galaxy. None of these people foresaw the impact of that was going to have. But it's having a tremendous impact, and you have to do something about it. And you have to have constitutional reform. That's the number one most important issue to deal with the future. And if you don't have constitutional reform, you're going to continue to have all the bad things happen and all the left wing or right wing crying about this or that. Nothing is going to get fixed. Nothing is going to be changed. We're just going to get worse and worse and worse and worse unless you fix it. And that's what we need, is constitutional reform. And I don't think it's going to happen, to be honest with you, unfortunately, because corporations have so much power that they're keeping us divided. And they're intentionally keeping us divided because they don't want constitutional reform. They like it the way that it is, where they have all the power. They like it that way. Unfortunately, I don't see that actually happening, but that is what everybody should be wanting. And if you're watching this broadcast, this is what you should be having. So Bernie Sanders, instead of going around saying, let's fight oligarchs, which is a very existential kind of thing to fight against, he should definitively say, let's have constitutional reform. But the reason why he doesn't do that, and the reason why we probably can never have constitutional reform, is because of one issue. And one issue most importantly, and that's the Second Amendment, gun control. And overwhelmingly, it's the Republicans that would not want constitutional reform because they want us basically to go back to the 1800s. You know, basically that's their idea, but everything should go back to the 1800s. And the forefathers to them are like, you know, God, Jesus, Babe Ruth, and the forefathers. I mean, that's like the order, like how it goes. You know, I mean, they're right up there with Jesus, okay? And so they said we should have weapons, and I have the right to protect my family. And yeah, right, with your little pop gun against Black Hawk helicopters. Good luck with that. Yeah. No, maybe home invasion. Well, how about we just have stronger doors so they can't have home invasion? They do around the rest of the world, but not in America. You know, it's just, it's stupid. You know what I mean? The whole idea of saying that we have to have guns, privately owned guns. And I'm not saying that you can't have them at all, or that you can't have fun with them at target practice or something like that. But AK-47s and things like that, I mean, come on, give me a break. People don't need to own those things. And so people are like, well, what are you going to do if the government decides to take over and kick you out of your home? Well, if we get to that point, your little gun that you have is not going to help. You're not going to win. You're not going to be able to form a militia anymore. You know, it used to be that if there was an invading power or the government was invading, you could fight them with your guns because your firepower could equal their firepower. And so there was a legitimate reason to make sure that people always had guns. But now, if you're going to fight against the government, there is no way that your firepower is going to equal what the government can bring to the table. It's just not going to happen. It's just never going to. We're never going to be able to go there again. Those days are gone. So you have to have a viewpoint of this. But because of gun control, and because Republicans are so adamant about it, and they've gone down the rabbit hole, the echo chamber, so deep and so hard that they believe in gun control so resolutely, that's going to stand in the way, ultimately, of having constitutional reform. That issue is actually the single obstacle that prevents the rest of the world from being a better place to live for everybody. That one issue is the heart of it all. Seems amazing, right? But that's it. And you heard it here first. And so I think that covers everything. So we'll do a quick review. All right, so we've got, number one was we're not going to have space jobs. And AI, yeah, is going to wipe out a lot of jobs on Earth. Number two, the oil age from 1850 to 2150. 500 years in the future, people are going to look back on us very enviously and say, man, what they could have done with that oil, and they wasted it. They just blew it. They just wasted it. Man, I'm just disgusted with that. They're going to be so envious and jealous of us. And we have the luxury of having access to oil now, which after 2150, never again. Never again. Not for hundreds or thousands of years, millions of years maybe, but not in thousands and thousands of years. We're not going to have that access to that resource ever again. We can't find it on Mars, we can't find it on the moon, we can't find it anywhere. Okay, so that was number two. Number three, cell phones have become a must-own thing. It's not a consumer option anymore. You don't have a consumer choice anymore. And this is endemic of the problem of having corporations control everything. Because they take away consumer, they change the market. And so the invisible hand that Adam Smith talks about is gone. When you force people that they must buy something, that's a whole different element that Adam Smith never thought about. But that's what's happening with smartphones. So that was number three. Number four, I didn't actually talk about number four. Number four is in America, the problem with America is that, as opposed to the rest of the world, is that because America is so controlled by corporations, everything is done by contract. Everything is contractual. Everything is, and you've got all this legal mumbo jumbo. You've got like 20 pages of legal BS. Every time you do anything, you just say, I want to buy a ticket online. You got 20 pages of legal mumbo jumbo that actually comes with that, because we're so bogged down in all this litigation, and it all has to do with contracts and binding people to do things. And that's what corporations want. Because here's the thing. If a corporation does not keep their end of the contract, what am I going to do about it? Sue the corporation? Of course not. So contracts are absolutely just a one-way thing. It's control of the people. Because the people can't, if some private person owes me $20,000 and I sue them and I can win a judgment in small claims, big deal. How am I going to collect on that? I'm not going to collect on that. But if I owe a corporation $10, oh boy, they are going to hound me for life. It's like doing rape or something. You know, they're going to make sure that I pay that, or it's going to ruin everything, including my credit, which, like I said, I talked earlier in an earlier episode about credit court. We should have credit court. Why doesn't it exist? Well, you only need it in America, because only in America do they do this to people, and they have credit controls everything. And it's because it's all about corporate control and corporations controlling you. And one of the ways that they control the populace is with contracts. And what they also want you to do is they want you to have to look at life from a month-to-month basis, because they want this income stream, this monthly income stream. So all of the subscriptions that they're trying to make you buy, all these subscriptions, those are all contracts. And the fact that we don't have SIM cards in America, I mean, we have them, but you buy a phone through a carrier and then you sign a contract for 2 years or something. That doesn't happen anywhere else. Nobody else does that to the people. Only in America did they do these things. And it's because it's all about corporate control and corporate controlling you. And the reason why is because it has to do with the way financial institutions work. So if a big corporation gets you to sign a contract and you're committed to the next 2 years, or you sign up for a subscription and you have a contract with that subscription, and so that subscription company now can say, look, we have these people signed to contracts, and for every month for the next 2 years they're going to be paying us $15 a month every month, and we've got 150,000 subscribers. Well, that means that they have a guaranteed monthly income by contract of $150,000 a month, or $150,000 times $15, whatever it is, okay. And so they can go to a financial institution and they can show them this income stream that's called receivables, futures, receivables, okay. They have this tremendous amount of receivables, and they can get loans on these receivables. And with these loans, they can leverage that money in order to expand. And that's the whole key to how corporations work and how they become so big, is leveraging money. And the way that they leverage money is they get financial institutions to give them loans based on the fact that they have this huge income stream, these receivables, these futures, that they can use as collateral for these loans. That's why it works that way. But it's only in America where this happens, because only in America do the corporations rule and control everything. So that was point number 4 that I wanted to make. And again, the only way that's going to change is to make a fundamental change to the system, which means constitutional reform. We have to get big business out of politics. And if they're out of politics, it becomes more like China, where the government now can control and regulate and limit the authority and the invasiveness of corporations, unless they think it's in the best interest of the people. Okay? And if we have international law, then you can't do like what China does, which China sometimes is very, very draconian and oppressive. And so you could come in and you can say, well, no, actually that's not benefiting the people, because international law, or the UN, you know, would much more look out for the interests and the well-being of the people collectively as a whole worldwide, which we're eventually going to have to address that. Okay, and so number 5 was tap and pay, which is like the biggest phenomenon of the 2020s that I've noticed so far. And actually, progress is moving very slow now, which is why it's taking us all this time just to be able to go to the moon again. You know, I mean, we did it easily 60 years ago. Now it's hard suddenly. progress is going very slow. It's because corporations control everything and it's bogging everything down. And you're not able to have new and fresh ideas. Like, they don't like me, for sure. Okay, so number 6, cord cutting. Bad management, main reason, because otherwise it's a product that we still need. I mean, people still buy LP albums and stuff, you know. I mean, so cable is something that people still want, but the management of these companies are such jerks that people just have had enough, and they can't, and they're so full of themselves, and they got their head up their butt so far that they can't figure out, you know what? Maybe we should have better customer service, and maybe we should respond better to the customers. But corporations don't have to do this, not in America. They don't care what the people think. They don't care what people's opinions are. They don't care about customer service. They rule. But now you have this conflict between two corporations. One arrogant company, which is the cable company, versus another arrogant corporation, which is now the streaming companies. Aha! So that's a problem with management. Number 7, population and resource management, primarily water, but also as it affects global warming, and ultimately what's most important is controlling or containing in some way microplastics, which mostly is being created by all the plastic bags that we have. And again, like with cable, like with record albums, it's not something that you should necessarily make go away. You have to manage it and deal with it somehow in an effective way, in a constructive way, so that we can still have plastic bags when we need them, but we're not disposing them at the dumps, and we're not dumping them in our oceans, okay? We're disposing of them, or recycling them, even better, in a more efficient way. If we could like totally recycle all plastic bags, that would be the answer. Okay, and it's a big problem that we're going to have to face, because as people's brains get filled with plastic, it's going to cause a problem. You know, okay, and so that was number 8. Was term marriage. That was another thing. I think we should have term marriage. This is a legal evolution that needs to be done culturally around the world, in fact, because the antiquated ideas of the Middle Ages just don't apply anymore in the year 2026. Okay, number 9 was Gen W, 1962 to 1967, Generation W. It's completely different from baby boomers. It's completely different from Generation X. Okay, so that was that one. Number 10 was, I talked about microplastics. Number 11 is expanded UN powers so that they have jurisdiction to enforce effectively international law. Right now there's no jurisdiction for that, and there's no way to do that. There needs to be a way to do that. And then lastly, the most important thing is constitutional reform. Bernie Sanders is great, let's fight oligarchs, he's right, but that's not going to happen without constitutional reform. You're not going to have election reform either unless you have constitutional reform. And the biggest single obstacle that's getting away of all of that is the Second Amendment. That we need to get rid of. Not saying that you can't have guns at all, but it needs to be seriously regulated. And in countries where guns are seriously regulated, it's a lot safer to live there. Incredibly, like exponentially safer for people to live there. Okay, I guess that about wraps it up. This was episode 36. Thank you for watching and having patience and sitting through the whole thing. I'm Scott Houston. This is Learning with Power. I'm getting off my podium and off my soapbox now, and I'm going to stop pontificating. This episode was called The Next 50 Years, and I hope you enjoyed it. And we'll see you next time. And I still plan to do 2000 BC. I still plan to do that series and continue that series, the historical series that I started. But I wanted to address this one now because I think it's more current and more relevant to what's happening today. And so like, subscribe, share, tell your friends if you like this broadcast, because I would like for more people to hear it. I think eventually, in the distant future, people are going to discover this because it's out there. It's on the internet. It's on the great web right now. They'll find it eventually. And I think 50 years from now, people might say, you know what, this guy, 50 years ago, saw this coming. He knew that this had to be done. He predicted this 50 years ago. Geez, why didn't we listen to him? I don't know. I think that's also the future, which is why I do this. not just for my health, because I think in a way I'm leaving a legacy with these broadcasts and these episodes. And I hope you think the same way. All right, so that's it. I'm really done now. Before I was pretending to be done, but it wasn't really. So this time I'm really actually done. And stay tuned next time. Hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching.